You are nothing but a pathetic charity case. We are terminating you effective immediately, and security will escort you out right now." My sister-in-law's shrill voice echoed across the crowded marble lobby of my family's corporate headquarters, making dozens of employees stop and stare. It was 8:45 in the morning on my very first day as a low-level data entry clerk. She sneered at my clothes, reveling in her power trip, completely unaware that I was not there to collect a paycheck. I calmly unclipped my temporary visitor badge, handed it to her, and smiled. I told her to tell my father that the emergency board meeting in exactly 5 hours was going to be absolutely unforgettable. She had no idea that the anonymous billionaire savior arriving at 2 o'clock to bail out their bankrupt company was actually me, and I had already bought 80% of their voting shares. My name is Naomi, and I am 33 years old. Before I share exactly how I dismantled my toxic family's empire piece by piece, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to smile through the pain while an arrogant family member tried to tear you down. The morning sun was streaming through the massive glass walls of Apex Solutions, casting long shadows across the imported Italian marble floors. Apex was a mid-sized logistics firm that my father Harrison had built into his personal monument. The lobby was bustling with employees rushing to catch the elevators, clutching their coffees and preparing for the workday. I had barely stepped through the revolving doors when Lexi intercepted me. Lexi was my brother Cameron's wife, a woman who wore her unearned title of Human Resources Director like a weapon. She was dressed in an overly branded designer outfit that screamed of new money and deep insecurity. Her eyes narrowed with a predatory gleam the moment she spotted me. She did not even wait for me to reach the security desk. She marched right into the center of the atrium, blocking my path. "Stop right there, Naomi," she commanded, raising her voice so that the nearest groups of employees would hear. People immediately began to slow their pace, glancing over their shoulders with thinly veiled curiosity. "Lexi," I said evenly, keeping my hands relaxed at my sides. "Good morning to you too. I am just heading up to the 4th floor to get my desk assignment." "You are not going anywhere except back out those doors," she announced, crossing her arms over her chest. "I just got off the phone with Harrison. We have decided that bringing you on board is way too much of a liability for Apex. Your father only offered you this data entry job because your mother begged him to take pity on you. But frankly, we cannot afford to carry dead weight, not even family." I stood perfectly still, letting her cruel words hang in the air. The murmurs around the lobby grew louder. I knew exactly what she was doing. This was a public execution designed to put the family disappointment back in her place. For years, they had spun a narrative that I was an utter failure because I had refused to follow my father's rigid, misogynistic corporate path. I had moved away, lived quietly, and built my own venture capital firm from the ground up. Because I never flaunted my wealth or begged for their approval, they naturally assumed I was destitute. Lexi took a step closer, looking me up and down with exaggerated disgust. "I mean, look at you," she scoffed, gesturing toward my outfit. I was wearing a bespoke, unbranded charcoal suit that cost more than her entire wardrobe, but she lacked the refinement to recognize quiet luxury. "You show up on your first day looking like you bought your clothes at a thrift store. Did you really think you could just waltz into a professional corporate environment after squandering your life on those stupid startup fantasies?" Cameron warned me. "You would be a disaster, but I did not think you would embarrass us before 9 in the morning." "I assure you, Lexi, I am dressed perfectly for the business I am conducting today," I replied, my voice calm and completely devoid of the panic she was so desperately trying to provoke. Her face flushed with hot irritation at my lack of tears. She had fully expected me to crumble, to beg for the minimum wage job, to ask her to call my father and plead on my behalf. When I did none of those things, her voice grew louder and significantly harsher. "Do not talk back to me in my lobby," she snapped. "Cameron has been working 18-hour days to keep this company afloat. He is a brilliant chief operating officer, and he does not have time to hold his little sister's hand while she pretends to be a working professional. You threw your life away, Naomi. You refused to listen to Harrison, you wasted whatever money you had, and now you expect us to clean up your mess. Well, the charity stops today. We are terminating you effective immediately, Security will escort you out. She snapped her fingers toward two large security guards standing near the reception desk. They exchanged uncomfortable glances, but dutifully began walking toward us. The humiliation was supposed to break me right there on the polished marble floor. My family had always used public shame to enforce obedience, a toxic tactic spearheaded by my father and perfected by his golden child Cameron. But I was not the scared 20-year-old girl they remembered. I felt no urge to defend myself or explain that my so-called stupid startup fantasies had evolved into a massive private equity firm. I felt no need to tell her that Cameron was not a brilliant executive but a corrupt thief who had embezzled millions to fund his sports cars and luxury vacations, driving Apex Solutions into catastrophic debt. They were drowning, and they thought kicking me off the boat would somehow save them. I reached up and calmly unclipped the temporary paper visitor badge from my lapel. I held it out to her. Lexi snatched it from my hand, a victorious smirk plastered across her face. "Smart girl," she sneered. "Now turn around and walk out before I have them physically throw you out." I looked her dead in the eyes, my expression entirely unreadable. "I want to do this right, Lexi," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but laced with a cold, terrifying authority. "Tell your father-in-law that the board meeting in exactly 5 hours should be highly interesting. I highly recommend you and Cameron attend. It will be the most important meeting of your entire lives." Lexi scoffed, rolling her eyes dramatically. "You are completely delusional. That board meeting is for executive leadership and our new investors. It has nothing to do with a fired data entry clerk." "Just deliver the message," I said smoothly. I turned on my heel and walked toward the revolving doors. I did not look back. I did not rush. I walked with the measured, deliberate pace of someone who owned the very ground they were stepping on. Stepping out into the crisp morning air. I bypassed the crowded bus stop that my family assumed I would be using. Instead, I walked straight to the curb where a sleek, armored black Maybach was waiting idly. The uniformed driver immediately stepped out, opening the rear door for me with a respectful nod. I slid into the plush leather interior, the heavy door shutting solidly behind me, instantly silencing the noise of the city street. I reached into my designer handbag, pulled out my phone, and dialed a number I knew by heart. My lead corporate attorney answered on the first ring. "Mitchell," I said, leaning back against the luxurious headrest. "Lexi just played her part perfectly in the lobby. I am officially terminated from Apex Solutions." "Excellent," Mitchell replied, his voice practically humming with predatory legal efficiency. "I assume we are a go for Phase 2? "We are an absolute go," I instructed coldly. "Begin the asset freeze on Apex Solutions immediately. Lock down their corporate accounts and notify the bank that the majority shareholder is invoking the debt covenants. I do not want to leave Harrison or Cameron a single cent to maneuver with before 2 o'clock. Consider it done, Naomi. They will not even be able to buy a cup of coffee with company funds by noon." I ended the call and looked out the tinted window as the Maybach glided away from the building. My family thought they had just disposed of their biggest embarrassment. They had absolutely no clue they had just finalized their own absolute destruction. My phone began to vibrate against the leather seat, a relentless, angry buzzing that signaled the beginning of the digital assault. I glanced down at the screen. The notifications were flooding in from the family group chat, ironically titled Apex Legacy. My father Harrison was the first to strike. His message was a wall of capitalized letters and fury. "Naomi, what on earth is wrong with you? Lexi just called me practically in tears. You caused a massive scene in the main atrium and forced her to call corporate security on your very first day. You are an absolute disgrace to this family. We try to throw you a lifeline and you publicly humiliate us." Before I could even process the sheer absurdity of Lexi claiming to be in tears, a second message popped up. This one was from my mother, Catherine. "I literally begged your father to give you this data entry job, Naomi. We opened our doors to you. We gave you a chance to finally do some honest work after your ridiculous entrepreneurial failures. And this is how you repay our generosity. Why cannot you just be compliant and grateful for once in your life? Look at your brother. Cameron has been working himself to the bone for this company. He carries the weight of the entire family on his shoulders. And you cannot even manage to walk through the front door without throwing a childish tantrum. I read the words with a cold, clinical detachment. Years ago, texts like these would have sent me into a spiral of anxiety and self-doubt. I would have drafted a dozen apologies desperately trying to explain my side of the story, begging them to understand that Lexi had ambushed me. But the gaslighting was so incredibly textbook now that it bordered on boring. It was the same script they had been reading from since I was a teenager. I stared at Catherine's praise for Cameron, remembering exactly how my brother had earned his reputation as the family genius. When I was 22, I had spent 6 months researching and drafting a comprehensive digital expansion strategy for Apex Solutions. I had proudly brought the binder to Harrison's home office, outlining how the company could cut costs by 30%. Harrison had chuckled, patted me on the shoulder, and told me to leave the heavy lifting to the men. He suggested I focus on finding a suitable husband instead. 2 months later, Cameron presented that exact same binder at a Sunday family dinner. He had simply swapped my name for his on the title page. Harrison had treated Cameron to an extravagant steak dinner, praising his visionary mind, and promoted him to Vice President of Strategy the very next day. Catherine had purchased Cameron a $30,000 watch to celebrate his brilliance. When I tried to speak up when I cried and pointed out that it was my work, Catherine had pulled me into the kitchen and pinched my arm hard. She told me I was being hysterical and bitter. She hissed that a good sister supports her brother's success instead of trying to steal his spotlight. They had convinced everyone that I was a jealous, unstable failure. They repeated the lie so often that they actually believed it themselves. I locked my phone screen, letting it go dark. I would not reply. They wanted a reaction. They wanted me to defend myself so they could twist my words and play the victims. I was going to give them nothing but absolute silence. A few minutes later, my phone lit up again. This time it was an incoming call, not a text. The name on the screen made me sit up slightly straighter. It was Elijah. Elijah was my sister Brittany's husband. He was a brilliant, hardworking African-American man with a master's degree in supply chain logistics. He was also the only person in the entire extended family who possessed an ounce of integrity. Naturally, my family treated him appallingly. Harrison constantly undermined Elijah's operational plans at Apex, intentionally passing over his data-driven strategies to implement Cameron's disastrous, expensive ideas. Catherine frequently made passive-aggressive comments about Elijah's background, treating him as an outsider who should be grateful they allowed him to marry Brittany. I answered the call. "Hello, Elijah. Naomi, are you okay?" His voice was hushed and urgent, echoing slightly, as if he were hiding in one of the concrete stairwells. "I just saw the whole thing go down in the lobby. I saw Lexi confront you. I know you did not cause a scene. I was watching from the mezzanine balcony." A small, genuine smile touched my lips. Elijah had always been observant. He was the only person who consistently remembered my birthday. He was the only one who would casually bring me a plate of food at family barbecues when Catherine deliberately forgot to set a place for me at the main table. "I am perfectly fine, Elijah," I said, my voice steady and warm. "I appreciate you checking on me, I really do." Lexi is parading around the Human Resources Department acting like she just survived a hostage situation. Elijah continued, his voice dropping even lower. "But that is not why I am calling. Something really bad is happening up on the executive floor. Cameron has been shredding documents and physically destroying hard drives in his office all morning. He looks like a cornered animal. Harrison is sweating bullets about this 2 o'clock board meeting with the new investors. I think the company is going under, Naomi. I think they brought you in to pin something on you." "They cannot pin anything on me if I do not work there," I replied smoothly. "And Elijah, you are right, the company is in critical condition. Cameron has been cooking the books for years, and Harrison has been signing off on it." I knew it. Elijah breathed a mixture of validation and dread in his tone. "I warned Harrison about the missing capital expenditures 6 months ago, and he threatened to fire me." "Listen to me very carefully, Elijah," I said, my tone shifting to absolute authority. "I want you to go back to your office right now. Do not wait for your lunch break. Do not draw attention to yourself. I want you to quietly pack up all of your personal belongings, your photos, your degrees, your coffee mug. Put everything in your car and then leave the building. Take the rest of the day off." There was a heavy silence on the other end of the line. Elijah was smart enough to recognize a genuine warning when he heard one. "Naomi, what exactly is going to happen at 2 o'clock?" he asked quietly. "Justice," I answered. "Just pack your things, Elijah. You are the only decent person in that building, and I do not want you caught in the crossfire when the walls come crashing down." I ended the call with Elijah and let my phone drop into my lap. The heavy silence of the armored vehicle wrapped around me. Once again, the smooth hum of the engine, a stark contrast to the absolute chaos I knew was currently unfolding inside the Apex Solutions headquarters. As my driver navigated the crowded city streets, I pulled a secured tablet from my leather briefcase and opened the master financial file. The irony of the entire situation was almost physically palpable. Just 3 weeks ago, my father had summoned me to a formal family dinner. He had put on a pathetic display of parental magnanimity, telling me that despite my ongoing failures to launch a successful career, the family was willing to throw me a lifeline. He had offered me a data entry position that paid barely above minimum wage. He framed it as a profound charity case, a generous favor from a loving father to a deeply misguided daughter. The reality staring back at me from the glowing screen of my tablet was vastly different. Apex Solutions was bleeding cash at an unprecedented, catastrophic rate. Cameron had driven their operating margins into the ground with disastrous logistical contracts and massive ego-driven marketing campaigns that yielded zero return on investment. The company was drowning in defaulted loans, desperately fighting off aggressive creditors daily. Harrison thought he was playing a brilliant game of corporate chess. He firmly believed that today, at exactly 2 in the afternoon, a mysterious billionaire savior from a massive private equity conglomerate was arriving to bail them out. He had spent the last month practically groveling to my firm's representatives through third-party ego-driven marketing campaigns that yielded zero return on investment. The company was drowning in defaulted loans, desperately fighting off aggressive creditors daily. Harrison thought he was playing a brilliant game of corporate chess. He firmly believed that today, at exactly 2 in the afternoon, a mysterious billionaire savior from a massive private equity conglomerate was arriving to bail them out. He had spent the last month practically groveling to my firm's representatives through third-party intermediaries, promising them the moon and the stars if they would just inject enough capital to save his crumbling legacy. He had absolutely no idea that the conglomerate buying out his defaulting debt was entirely owned by me. I had spent the last 12 months quietly acquiring every single piece of toxic debt Apex Solutions had generated. My firm had purchased their outstanding loans for pennies on the dollar through various shell companies and subsidiary funds. Today was not a friendly bailout. It was a hostile, merciless debt-to-equity swap. By 2 exactly, my firm would legally convert that mountain of debt into a controlling 80% stake in Apex Solutions. The family thought they were keeping their empire. In reality, they had already lost it, and I was simply arriving to hand them their eviction notices. The Maybach glided to a smooth halt in front of a soaring, ultra-modern high-rise in the city's most exclusive district. The doorman, recognizing the vehicle, immediately stepped forward to open the heavy glass door, greeting me with a deeply respectful nod. I bypassed the main lobby and took the private elevator directly to the top floor. The doors slid open silently, revealing my hidden sanctuary. It was a sprawling $12 million penthouse with panoramic views of the skyline, custom imported furniture, and museum-quality ultra-modern high-rise in the city's most exclusive district. The doorman, recognizing the vehicle, immediately stepped forward to open the heavy glass door, greeting me with a deeply respectful nod. I bypassed the main lobby and took the private elevator directly to the top floor. The doors slid open silently, revealing my hidden sanctuary. It was a sprawling $12 million penthouse with panoramic views of the skyline, custom imported furniture, and museum-quality art. It was a pristine world completely separate from the toxic grip of my family. Nobody in the Apex Circle knew this place existed. Not my parents, not Cameron, not Lexi. The only person who had access to this sanctuary was Todd, my boyfriend of 2 years. I had always believed Todd was my safe harbor. When I returned home exhausted from ruthlessly building my firm, he was the one pouring the wine and listening to my frustrations. I walked across the plush carpet, the thick material absorbing the sound of my footsteps completely. I expected to find Todd in the kitchen making his morning coffee, but the room was empty. A low voice drifted down the hallway from my private study. I approached quietly, assuming he was on a work call. But as I drew closer, the specific cadence of his voice and the name he spoke made my blood run instantly cold. Todd was sitting in my leather desk chair, his back to the open door, speaking animatedly into his phone. "Yes, Cameron, I am telling you, you have absolutely nothing to worry about," Todd was saying, a sickeningly ingratiating tone dripping from his voice. "Naomi is completely oblivious. She left for the office early this morning thinking she was actually going to be doing data entry. She genuinely believes your father is trying to help her out. I have been telling her all week how lucky she is to finally have a stable job." He paused, listening to my brother on the other end of the line. I know. Todd chuckled, a cruel, mocking sound that sent a shockwave of absolute disgust through my chest. "She is delusional. She keeps rambling about her little startup investments, but I have kept her totally distracted just like we agreed. She is manageable. Now, regarding that vice president of business development position we discussed, you promised me the title and the six-figure salary would be finalized before the end of the quarter. I am doing my part, Cameron. I am keeping the family embarrassment out of your hair." I stood frozen in this doorway, staring at the back of the man I thought I loved. The betrayal was so absolute, so meticulously calculated, that it temporarily stole the breath from my lungs. Todd was not my safe harbor. He was a spy, a paid informant planted in my life by my own brother. He was leaking my daily schedule, my private conversations, and my emotional state directly to the family that despised me, all to secure a prestigious job title at a company that was secretly bankrupt. He had sold my trust to advance his own pathetic career. I took a single step into the study. The sound of my designer heel clicking against the hardwood floor was like a gunshot in the quiet room. Todd whipped around, his eyes widening in sheer absolute panic as he realized I was standing in the doorway. I stepped back into the sprawling marble hallway of my penthouse, leaving Todd to stew in his own terror for a moment. I glanced at the glowing screen. The name flashing was Elijah. Elijah was my brother-in-law, married to my superficial, status-obsessed sister, Brittany. More importantly, Elijah was an exceptionally brilliant African-American man holding a master's degree in supply chain logistics from a top-tier university. He was the operations manager at Apex Solutions, a title that grossly underestimated his actual intellectual capacity and his daily contributions to the firm. My family, completely blinded by their own deep-seated prejudices and blatant nepotism, constantly undermined him. Harrison and Cameron treated him as a glorified assistant, intentionally dismissing his data-driven strategies simply because he did not fit their narrow, bigoted view of what a corporate leader should look like. They marginalized him at every family dinner, and they ignored his operational warnings in every board meeting. Brittany was no better, treating her husband as a mere accessory rather than an equal partner. Despite being the smartest man in any room, he walked into Elijah was suffocated by my family's toxic culture. Yet he was the only person connected to the Apex bloodline who had ever treated me with genuine, unadulterated respect. I pressed the answer button and brought the phone to my ear, keeping my eyes locked on the study door where Todd was trapped. "Hello, Elijah," I said, my voice completely stripped of the rage that was currently burning through my veins regarding Todd's betrayal. "Naomi, are you okay?" Elijah asked immediately. His voice was hushed, carrying a slight echo that suggested he was speaking from a secure location, likely one of the concrete stairwells at the Apex headquarters. The genuine concern in his tone was a sharp contrast to the deceit I had just uncovered in my own home. "I saw the entire thing go down in the lobby this morning. I was walking across the mezzanine balcony when Lexi cornered you." "I am perfectly fine, Elijah," I replied smoothly, leaning against the cool wall of the hallway. It was exactly the kind of theatrical performance I expected from her. "It was a complete setup," Elijah continued, his voice tight with suppressed frustration. Lexi had security positioned near the elevators before you even walked through the front revolving doors. She orchestrated the entire public shaming to make a point. I wanted to come down there and intervene, Naomi. I really did. But Harrison has been breathing down my neck all week, threatening to terminate my department's funding if I step out of line. I would never want you to risk your position to defend me. I assured him, feeling a surge of profound appreciation for the lone supporter I had in that wretched building. Lexi's little power trip is the least of my concerns today. That is actually why I'm calling you privately. Elijah said, his tone shifting from personal concern to sharp, urgent professionalism. Lexi's stunt in the lobby is just a distraction. Something massive and incredibly dangerous is happening on the executive floor right now. I have been running independent audits on the supply chain accounts for the past 3 months because the vendor invoices were not matching our delivery manifests. I listened intently, allowing the silence to encourage him to continue. Cameron has been cooking the books, Naomi. Elijah revealed the heavy weight of the secret evident in his hushed whisper. He has been funneling millions of dollars through phantom logistics vendors. We are paying for massive freight shipments that simply do not exist. The money is being routed to offshore holding accounts. When I tried to bring the discrepancy to Harrison's attention last week, he completely shut me down and told me I was overstepping my bounds. But this morning, Cameron is in full panic mode. He is physically shredding documents in his suite. He is destroying hard drives. They are desperately trying to hide the financial bleeding before the 2 o'clock board meeting with the new investors. A cold, satisfied smile touched my lips. Elijah was sharp enough to catch the massive fraud that Harrison was desperately trying to bury. My brother-in-law was a phenomenal asset entirely wasted on a family of corrupt fools who were too arrogant to utilize his talents. You are incredibly thorough, Elijah, I said, validating his brilliant investigative work. Your operational audits are flawlessly accurate. Cameron has indeed been embezzling corporate funds to support his luxury lifestyle, and Harrison has been fraudulently signing off on the quarterly reports to protect his golden child. They have effectively bankrupted Apex Solutions. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. You know about the phantom accounts, Naomi. If the new investors discover this during the buyout meeting this afternoon, Harrison and Cameron are going to face federal indictment. The entire company is going to implode today. Elijah, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I instructed, my voice dropping to a register of absolute commanding authority. I value your integrity, and I value your mind. You are the only person in that building who actually understands how the company operates. Because of that, I am giving you a direct warning. A warning, he repeated, confusion mingling with realization. I want you to leave that stairwell, walk directly to your office, and pack up your personal belongings, I told him clearly. Take your framed degrees, your photographs, and anything else you care about. Put them in your car and leave the Apex premises before 2 o'clock. Do not tell Brittany. Do not warn Harrison. Just quietly remove yourself from the blast radius. The silence that followed was thick with dawning comprehension. Elijah was a brilliant man. He did not need me to spell out the exact details to understand that a catastrophic shift in power was imminent. He realized in that profound moment that the sister-in-law everyone dismissed as a failure was holding the detonator to the entire corporate empire. Understood, Elijah said quietly, asking no further questions. I am packing my things right now. Take care of yourself, Naomi. You too, Elijah, I replied. I will be in touch very soon. I ended the call and slipped the phone into my tailored pocket. The confirmation of Cameron's frantic document shredding was the perfect validation of my impending strike. The Apex Empire was already burning from the inside out. I turned my attention back to the study door, my expression hardening into a mask of pure ice. Elijah was safe. Now it was time to deal with the traitor standing in my home. I stepped back into the doorway, locking eyes with Todd, ready to systematically dismantle the man who thought he could sell me out to my own family. Todd's hand shook violently as he scrambled to press the end call button on his smartphone. The device slipped from his sweaty fingers, clattering loudly onto the polished mahogany desk. For a man who had just spent the last 10 minutes confidently negotiating his corporate future with my brother, he currently looked like a terrified child caught stealing from a cash register. His chest heaved as he tried to drag air into his lungs, his eyes darting frantically around my private study as if searching for a hidden exit. There was none. He was trapped in the very sanctuary he had chosen to defile. This penthouse was supposed to be my absolute refuge. I had purchased this sprawling property entirely in cash, placing it under a blind trust to ensure my family could never trace my residence. It was a fortress designed to keep their relentless toxicity at bay. When I invited Todd to move in with me 6 months ago, I believed I was opening my safe haven to a partner who respected my boundaries. I had given him the access codes, the security clearances, and my complete trust. I had allowed him to share the one space in the world where I did not have to wear armor. Instead, I had willingly invited a parasite into my home. As I stood there watching his pathetic display of panic, the pieces of the past few months rapidly locked into place with blinding clarity. The sudden, uncharacteristic phone calls from Catherine demanding to know where I was on specific weekends. Harrison somehow knowing exactly which coffee shop I frequented on Tuesday mornings. Cameron making snide, highly specific remarks about my supposed financial struggles during our rare family encounters. They had not been guessing. They had not been lucky. They had a direct informant sleeping in my bed. Todd swallowed hard, forcing a sickeningly artificial smile onto his face. He held his hands up in a placating gesture, taking a cautious step toward me. "Naomi, sweetheart," he stammered, his voice pitching an octave higher than normal. "It is not what you think. I know how that sounded, but you have to understand. Cameron called me out of nowhere. He was just asking questions about how you were adjusting to the new data entry job. I was just humoring him to keep the peace. You know how your family gets when they feel ignored." I did not blink. I did not raise my voice. I simply crossed my arms and stared at him with absolute freezing contempt. "Humoring him," I repeated softly. The words hung in the silence of the study, heavy and dangerous. "You were humoring my brother by explicitly telling him that I was completely oblivious. You were humoring him by promising to keep me manageable and distracted. You were humoring him by demanding a 6-figure vice president title at Apex Solutions in exchange for your continued espionage services." Todd physically recoiled as I recited his exact phrases back to him. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking sickly and pale. He realized instantly that I had not just caught the end of his conversation. I had heard the entire transaction. I had heard him negotiate the price of my privacy. "They are your family, Naomi," Todd blurted out, shifting his strategy from denial to desperate justification. His tone took on that familiar, condescending edge he always used when he thought I was being too emotional. "They were genuinely worried about you. Harrison reached out to me months ago. He said you were living in a fantasy world, pretending to be some big-shot investor while secretly going broke. He told me you needed an intervention before you ruined your life completely. I was only trying to protect you." The absolute audacity of his gaslighting was staggering. He was actually trying to convince me that selling my daily schedule to my abusive father and corrupt brother was an act of profound romantic protection. He honestly believed he was the rational savior managing a delusional woman. "You thought you were protecting me by brokering a backroom deal for a corporate title," I stated, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "You decided that my boundaries were irrelevant. You took the security of this home, the trust I placed in you, and you monetized it. You sold my emotional state to Cameron so he could feel superior while his own company burned to the ground. I did it for us." Todd snapped, his fear morphing into defensive anger. "You refuse to communicate with them. You isolate yourself in this massive apartment, hiding from the real world. Harrison offered me a genuine opportunity at Apex Solutions. He offered me a chance to build a real future for us, because you clearly cannot handle your own family. I stepped up to be the man in this relationship. I secured a vice president position, so we would not have to worry about money when your little startup ventures finally fail." The knife twist of his betrayal was not just the act of spying itself. It was the sheer, breathtaking arrogance behind it. Todd truly believed I was weak. He believed the narrative my family had spun. He looked around my $12 million penthouse, drank my imported wine, slept in my custom bed, and somehow convinced himself that I was a financial failure who desperately needed his mediocre corporate intervention. I was willing to sacrifice my sanity and my safety just to secure a shiny new title on his resume. You secured nothing, I told him, taking a slow, deliberate step forward. You are not a corporate strategist. You are a cheap informant who just negotiated a job at a company that is currently defaulting on every major loan it possesses. You sold your loyalty to a sinking ship, Todd, and you sold out the only person who actually provided you with a life of luxury. Todd scoffed, crossing his arms, trying to regain some semblance of masculine authority. You are just being hysterical because your pride is hurt. Apex Solutions is a massive logistics firm. Harrison told me about the billionaire investor coming in today to expand their operations. They are about to double their market share. You have absolutely no idea how business works, Naomi. You are just angry because they offered me a seat at the executive table while you are stuck doing data entry. I looked at the man I had trusted, marveling at his absolute ignorance. He was standing in the center of my empire, entirely blind to the power I held. He had chosen to align himself with my abusers, betting his entire future on their fabricated wealth. He had handed them the knife and pointed it directly at my back. I did not feel heartbreak. I did not feel the urge to cry over a lost relationship. I felt an overwhelming, icy clarity. The betrayal was complete. My family had poisoned my sanctuary, and Todd had been their willing accomplice. It was time to show him exactly whose table he had just begged to sit at. I did not raise my voice or step closer. I simply held his gaze with a cold, terrifying calm that made his bravado completely disintegrate. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating, until the sheer weight of it forced him to speak again. You are acting completely unhinged right now, Naomi, Todd scoffed, running a nervous hand through his hair. He shifted his weight, trying to physically dominate the space by puffing out his chest. This is exactly what Harrison was warning me about. You get paranoid and push people away the second they try to intervene. You are completely out of touch with reality. I remained perfectly still. I let him dig his own grave, watching him deploy the exact same manipulative tactics my mother had used for decades. It was fascinating in a clinical sort of way to see how easily my family had infected his mind with their toxic narrative. Look at yourself, he continued, emboldened by my silence. You cannot even manage your own basic finances without going into the red. You have been playing businesswoman for years, chasing these ridiculous startup dreams, and you have absolutely nothing to show for it. Someone had to step up. I am securing our future because you clearly cannot do it yourself. I took another step toward me, adopting a tone of faux sympathy that made my skin crawl. I am doing the hard work here. I am managing your family's expectations. I am dealing with Cameron and Harrison so you do not have to. They gave you a job today because they know you are financially incompetent. If I had not brokered this deal, if I had not kept them informed about your erratic behavior, you would be stuck doing data entry for the rest of your life. You should be thanking me. Thanking you. I repeated, my voice devoid of any warmth. You genuinely believe you are the master strategist here. You think you are securing our future by acting as a paid informant for a man who embezzles from his own company. Stop being so incredibly dramatic. Todd snapped, his frustration boiling over. You do not understand basic corporate dynamics. Harrison is a titan in this city. Apex Solutions is about to receive a massive influx of capital from a major private equity firm. They are bringing in a billionaire investor this afternoon. I secured a spot on the winning team. I am making sure we have a safety net when your little business ventures completely fail. You are just too stubborn and proud to admit that you need my help to survive in the real world. His words were a perfect, sickening echo of my father's arrogance. Todd had swallowed their lies completely. He genuinely thought I was a fragile, incompetent woman who needed a man to secure her financial stability. He thought my absolute silence was a sign of submission. He had no idea it was the calm before the execution. I reached into my designer handbag and pulled out my secured tablet. I did not waste my breath arguing against his pathetic delusions. I simply tapped the screen a few times, accessing the encrypted files I used to manage my personal real estate portfolio. I walked over to the mahogany desk stood right next to him and placed the glowing tablet directly in his line of sight. Read the highlighted document, I commanded, my voice slicing through the thick tension in the room. Todd scoffed, rolling his eyes as if I were forcing him to look at a child's finger painting. But as his gaze dropped to the high-resolution screen, his arrogant smirk instantly froze. He blinked, leaning in closer, his eyes scanning the dense legal text of the property deed. He read the purchase price first, $12 million paid entirely in cash. Then his eyes darted to the top of the document where the name of the sole exclusive owner was printed in bold, undeniable letters. My name. The tablet slipped from his fingers and hit the desk with a sharp clack. He looked up at me, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. The absolute magnitude of his miscalculation was finally crashing down on him. He had spent months living in a $12 million fortress, drinking my imported wine, and sleeping in my custom bed, all while convincing himself he was the primary provider for a failing artist. "You own this entire penthouse," Todd whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of shock and dawning horror. "I own many things, Todd," I replied smoothly, crossing my arms and looking down at him with absolute disdain. "What fascinates me most is not that you chose to betray me. It is how incredibly cheap you were when you sold your loyalty. You traded your integrity for a vice president title at Apex Solutions, a company that has not turned a profit in 4 years. You allied yourself with Harrison and Cameron, two men who have embezzled their own legacy into the ground. They are currently drowning in over $60 million of defaulted loans." Todd shook his head frantically, backing away from the desk. "No, Harrison said they have an investor. He said a billionaire is coming today to finalize a massive capital injection." "And did you honestly think a corporate titan would rely on a data entry clerk's insecure boyfriend for strategic espionage?" I asked, dissecting his foolishness piece by piece. "Harrison fed you a fantasy to keep you compliant. You thought you were stepping up to be the man of the house, saving the hysterical woman from financial ruin. In reality, you are nothing but a cheap pawn, easily manipulated by a failing CEO who needed someone naive enough to believe his lies. You sold out the only person who actually provided you with a life of absolute luxury, and you did it for a temporary desk on a rapidly sinking ship." I did not wait for his pathetic response. I reached under the lip of the mahogany desk and pressed my thumb against a concealed biometric sensor. A subtle chime echoed through the room, followed immediately by a steady red light blinking on the security panel mounted near the door. The private security team for this building was comprised entirely of former military personnel. They were highly compensated specifically for their speed, their absolute discretion, and their unquestioning loyalty to the building's owners. Todd stared at the blinking red light, his chest heaving as the reality of his situation continued to crash down around him. He took a hesitant step forward, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. "Naomi, please," he begged, his voice trembling so violently it cracked. "We can talk about this. I was stupid. I was completely manipulated by your father. Harrison made it sound like you were in desperate trouble, and I just wanted to help you. I love you." I looked at my Patek Philippe watch, noting the precise position of the second hand. "You have exactly 3 minutes," I said, my voice cutting through his desperate pleas like a scalpel. "You may take one single bag from the master bedroom closet. You will only pack the items you brought with you when you moved in 6 months ago. Any clothing, watches, or accessories purchased with my money will remain here. If you attempt to take anything that belongs to me, my security team will detain you for grand larceny." 3 minutes. Todd choked out, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Naomi, be reasonable. All my things are here. My entire life is here." 2 minutes and 45 seconds, I replied smoothly, not breaking eye contact. "If you are not standing at the front door with your single bag when the security team arrives, you will leave with nothing but the clothes currently on your back. Anything left behind will be incinerated by the evening staff." The sheer terror finally overrode his shock. Todd spun around and sprinted down the hallway toward the master suite, his dress shoes slipping frantically against the polished marble floor. I listened to the chaotic sounds of his panic echoing from down the hall, drawers being ripped open, hangers clattering to the hardwood floor, zippers tearing in a desperate rush. He was frantically trying to salvage whatever miserable remnants of his life he could fit into a single duffel bag. I remained standing in the study, utterly motionless. I did not feel a single ounce of pity for the man tearing his life apart in the next room. Todd had made a calculated decision to align himself with my abusers. He had weighed my value against a promised corporate title and decided I was expendable. He had simply bet on the wrong horse, and now he was paying the absolute price for his profound stupidity. Exactly 2 minutes and 50 seconds later, the heavy oak double doors of my penthouse swung open. Two towering security operatives stepped into the entryway, their dark suits immaculately tailored, their expressions completely neutral. They moved with silent, practiced efficiency, flanking the doorway and waiting for my command. Todd stumbled out of the master suite hallway, gasping for breath, clutching a cheap canvas gym bag to his chest. His designer tie was skewed, his hair disheveled, sweat pouring down his face. He stopped dead in his tracks when he saw the two massive guards blocking the exit. He looked past them to me, his eyes brimming with genuine, unadulterated fear. "Naomi," he pleaded one last time, his voice dropping to a pathetic whine. He dropped to his knees right there on the expensive rug, his hands clasped together. "Do not do this. I have nowhere to go. I quit my consulting job because Harrison promised me the vice president role today. I do not have an apartment. I do not have a car. Please just give me another chance. I will do anything." I walked slowly out of the study and stood a few feet away from where he was kneeling. I looked down at him, observing the miserable, groveling creature he truly was. "Harrison is going to be fired for financial fraud at 2 o'clock today," I stated coldly. "Apex Solutions will cease to exist in its current form by sunset. You traded your career for a phantom position at a bankrupt company. Escort him out," I commanded, shifting my gaze to the security operatives. "If he ever attempts to enter this building again, or if he attempts to contact me through any channel, you are authorized to use whatever force necessary to remove the threat." The guards moved instantly. They grabbed Todd by his upper arms, hauling him to his feet with effortless strength. He thrashed weakly against their grip, but it was entirely useless. They dragged him backward toward the open doors. "You cannot do this to me," Todd screamed, his voice echoing shrilly in the corridor as they pulled him over the threshold. "I was trying to save you. You are making a massive mistake." I did not answer. I simply pressed the automated panel on the wall, and the heavy oak doors swung shut, cutting off his pathetic shouting with a solid, definitive thud. The electronic locks engaged with a heavy click. I was finally completely alone. The vast, luxurious penthouse was enveloped in absolute silence. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows in the living room, looking out over the sprawling city skyline. The morning sunlight caught the glass of the distant corporate towers gleaming brightly against the blue sky. I stood there and allowed the reality of the morning to fully wash over me. Within the span of a few hours, I had been publicly humiliated and fired by my arrogant sister-in-law. I had been digitally attacked and gaslighted by my own parents. I had discovered that the man sleeping in my bed was a paid informant selling my privacy for a job title. The double betrayal from both my blood relatives and my romantic partner should have shattered me. It should have sent me spiraling into the exact kind of hysterical breakdown my family always claimed I was prone to having. Instead, the betrayal acted as a forge. The intense heat of their treachery burned away any lingering traces of guilt or familial loyalty I might have secretly harbored. It solidified my resolve into unbreakable steel. They had proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that they viewed me as nothing more than a convenient victim to be used, abused, and discarded whenever it suited their selfish needs. They lacked even a basic shred of human decency. I checked my watch. The hands moved steadily forward, ticking closer to the appointed hour. It was time to leave this personal mess behind and step fully into the role of the apex predator. I needed to head to the secure virtual war room to finalize the legal executions with Mitchell and my forensic auditing team. The 2 o'clock board meeting was no longer just a corporate acquisition. It was going to be a total, unmerciful massacre. I would not spare a single one of them. I turned away from the floor-to-ceiling windows and walked down the expansive hallway toward my master suite. The time for reflection was over. I needed to prepare for war. I stepped into my massive custom-built walk-in closet, the soft motion sensor lights illuminating rows of designer garments. I reached up and unbuttoned the cheap, unremarkable blouse my mother had insisted I wear for my new data entry position. She had actually mailed it to me last week with a passive-aggressive note, suggesting I try to look presentable for once. I let the fabric drop to the floor and kicked it aside. I would never wear a costume of submission for that family again. Instead, I pulled out a razor-sharp, bespoke midnight blue suit, crafted by my personal tailor in Milan. The fabric was immaculate, the cut severe and completely unapologetic. It was the armor of a woman who commanded boardrooms, not one who cowered in lobbies. I slipped into a crisp, white silk shirt and fastened the tailored blazer, feeling the immediate shift in my posture. I moved to the glass display case in the center of the room and unlocked it, reaching for my favorite timepiece. I strapped the heavy diamond-encrusted Patek Philippe watch around my wrist. The cool metal against my skin was a grounding physical reminder of the empire I had built entirely on my own. I looked at my reflection in the full-length mirror. The vulnerable, eager-to-please daughter was completely dead. The ruthless chief executive officer was ready to take the wheel. I left the master suite and walked into my secure home office, locking the heavy soundproof door behind me. I sat down at my expansive glass desk and tapped the control panel, lowering the motorized blackout shades over the windows to ensure absolute privacy. I booted up the encrypted multi-monitor communication station and logged into the secure virtual war room my firm utilized for hostile takeovers. The screens flared to life instantly. On the primary monitor, my lead corporate attorney Mitchell sat at a massive conference table in our downtown headquarters. He looked impeccably sharp, surrounded by thick stacks of legal binders. On the adjacent screens, my elite team of forensic auditors were already logged in, their faces serious and focused. "Good morning, Naomi," Mitchell said, his voice crisp and strictly business. The asset freeze on Apex Solutions was executed flawlessly. Their banking accounts are completely locked, their corporate credit lines are severed, and their payroll systems are officially frozen. They are entirely paralyzed. As of 10:15 this morning, Harrison cannot even authorize the purchase of printer paper. "Excellent work, Mitchell," I replied, leaning forward and resting my forearms on the cool glass of my desk. "Now show me the final audit reports. I want to see exactly how deep my brother managed to bury this company before he started shredding his hard drives." The lead forensic auditor, a brilliant numbers expert named David, shared his screen to the central monitor. A complex web of financial ledgers, highlighted bank transfers, and offshore routing numbers materialized in front of me. "It is significantly worse than we initially projected, Naomi," David stated, bringing up a heavily redacted internal balance sheet. "Your brother-in-law Elijah was completely correct about the phantom logistics vendors. But Cameron was not just padding invoices. He created an entire network of shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands. He authorized massive monthly payouts from the Apex operating budget to these fake companies, claiming they were essential international freight partners. We tracked the routing numbers directly to private accounts solely controlled by Cameron." I stared at the staggering numbers glaring back at me from the screen. "How much did he steal?" David give me the exact figure. "Over the past 4 years, Cameron has successfully embezzled just over $14 million from Apex Solutions." David confirmed, his tone reflecting his professional disgust. "And we have the receipts for exactly where that money went. He used corporate funds to purchase 2 custom Lamborghinis fully paid in cash. He leased a massive luxury yacht for a 6-week vacation in the Maldives last summer. He even used company money to purchase a $3 million vacation home in Aspen under his wife's maiden name. Lexi has been living like royalty on stolen corporate capital." My jaw tightened. Lexi had stood in the lobby just hours ago, wearing designer clothes bought with stolen money, and called me a charity case. She had mocked my supposed failures, while her husband systematically robbed his own family blind. The sheer audacity was almost impressive. "What about Harrison?" I asked, shifting my gaze back to Mitchell. "My father micromanages every single cent that moves through that building. There is absolutely no way Cameron could siphon $14 million out of the operating budget without the chief executive officer noticing the massive hole in the quarterly reports." Mitchell smiled, a cold, predatory expression that meant he had found the kill shot. He held up a thick manila folder to the camera. "Harrison noticed," Mitchell confirmed. "He noticed 2 years ago. But instead of reporting his son to the authorities or removing him from the company, Harrison chose to cover it up to protect his golden child. We recovered the deleted tax returns your father filed with the federal government. Harrison personally signed off on massively inflated operational losses. He intentionally committed federal tax fraud to hide Cameron's embezzlement from the banks and the board of directors. He legally certified fraudulent documents to keep his precious son out of federal prison. The final pieces of the puzzle locked into place. Harrison had jeopardized the entire family legacy, broken federal laws, and driven a profitable company into complete bankruptcy just to protect Cameron. Yet when I simply wanted to pursue a career in finance, Harrison told me I was not smart enough to handle real money. He had protected a thief and exiled a visionary. "This is the final nail in the coffin," Mitchell stated, tapping the folder on the table. "They committed wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and federal tax evasion. The paper trail is completely undeniable. If we hand this over to the authorities, Harrison and Cameron will face a minimum of 10 years in federal prison." "We are not handing it over to the authorities just yet," I said, a dangerous calm settling over my mind. "We are going to use this to execute them in the boardroom. I want them to look at the undeniable proof of their own pathetic corruption. I want them to realize that the daughter they banished is the only reason they are not currently in handcuffs." I looked at the screens, seeing the readiness in my team's faces. The financial skeletons had been fully unearthed, and the graves were dug. My family thought they were walking into a celebration today. They were actually walking directly to their own funeral. "Prepare the termination documents," I ordered Mitchell. "We leave for the Apex building in 1 hour." Mitchell nodded, his fingers flying across his keyboard as he brought up the finalized capitalization table on my center monitor. The pie chart that appeared was a thing of absolute terrifying beauty. For decades, Harrison had ruthlessly guarded his 60% controlling interest in Apex Solutions, keeping Catherine and my older sister Brittany pacified with minor non-voting dividend shares. Cameron had been gifted a 20% voting stake the day he turned 25. I, of course, had been given absolutely nothing. Now the screen displayed a completely different reality. A massive solid wedge of deep navy blue consumed the vast majority of the chart, leaving only a microscopic sliver of gray for my family. "The debt-to-equity conversion is officially complete and recorded with the state," Mitchell stated, his tone carrying the heavy weight of a judge reading a final verdict. "Your primary holding company now legally possesses exactly 80.4% of all active voting shares in Apex Solutions. As of this very second, Naomi, you are the absolute majority owner. The family's equity has been diluted into utter insignificance. Their remaining combined shares do not even give them the legal standing to block a coffee machine purchase, let alone a corporate restructuring." I stared at the navy blue wedge representing my absolute dominance over the empire my father loved more than his own children. He had sacrificed his integrity, broken federal laws, and alienated his youngest daughter just to keep his iron grip on that company. Now it belonged entirely, leaning back in my leather chair. "Has he received any automated alerts from the banking institutions regarding the asset freeze or the equity swap?" David, my lead auditor, shook his head from the adjacent screen. "We timed the execution perfectly. The banks processed the freeze under a confidential regulatory hold. Harrison's executive dashboard currently shows a pending scheduled maintenance update. He is flying completely blind. He actually called the main creditor line an hour ago to confirm the 2 o'clock arrival of the primary investor. He sounded absolutely euphoric. I even asked if he should have the executive chef prepare a celebratory lobster lunch for the boardroom." I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. It was so incredibly typical of Harrison. He had driven his entire legacy into a $14 million grave of embezzlement and tax fraud, yet he fully expected a billionaire stranger to simply hand him a blank check and pat him on the back. He thought he was playing the role of the masterful, seasoned chief executive officer, navigating a minor cash flow issue. He genuinely believed that the new majority shareholder would be a silent partner, a wealthy fool who would provide endless capital while allowing Harrison and his golden child to continue running the show unchecked. He was completely convinced that today was his greatest victory. "Let him enjoy the anticipation of his lobster," I said coldly. "Mitchell, walk me through the legal safeguards. When I fire my father and brother this afternoon, I want absolute certainty that they cannot run to a judge and file a temporary restraining order to halt the transition." Harrison has kept high-priced defense attorneys on retainer for years. He will immediately try to tie this up in litigation to maintain his access to the corporate accounts. Mitchell's smile was the definition of lethal corporate grace. "He can certainly try, but he will fail before he even dials his lawyer's number. We structured this entire acquisition exclusively under Delaware corporate law. Apex Solutions is incorporated in Delaware, which means they are bound by the most ruthless efficiency-driven corporate statutes in the country. Because your firm now holds over 80% of the voting shares, we executed a written consent in lieu of a shareholder meeting. That means you legally approved your own hostile takeover without needing to invite them, notify them, or listen to their pathetic objections. Are there any loopholes regarding the termination clauses?" I pressed, needing to ensure the trap was flawless. "Cameron will claim he is entitled to a massive payout." "Zero loopholes," Mitchell confirmed, holding up a thick stack of finalized contracts to his webcam. "We are invoking the fraud and gross negligence clauses written directly into their own executive employment contracts. Because we have irrefutable proof of Cameron's embezzlement and Harrison's tax evasion, they are being terminated for cause." Under Delaware law, firing an executive for cause immediately nullifies any golden parachute provisions, severance packages, or stock option vesting. They have no legal grounds for an appeal. They have no grounds for an injunction. If they attempt to sue you for wrongful termination in the Chancery Court, we simply hand the forensic audit files over to the federal prosecutor and they go straight to prison. The legal cage is completely airtight. The sheer perfection of the legal strategy settled over me, bringing a profound sense of peace. I had not just taken their company, I had weaponized their own greed against them. Every terrible decision they had made, every dollar they had stolen, and every lie they had told was now the exact mechanism I was using to destroy them. They had built their own guillotine. I was merely the one stepping up to pull the lever. "Send the digital execution orders to my terminal," I commanded. Within seconds, a series of encrypted documents populated my screen. The written shareholder consent, the immediate termination notices for Harrison and Cameron, the formal restructuring mandate abolishing the human resources position currently occupied by my arrogant sister-in-law Lexi. I pulled a sleek stylus from my desk and firmly signed my name across the bottom of each document. With every stroke of the digital pen, I was erasing decades of toxic abuse and financial manipulation. I was taking back the power they had spent my entire life trying to strip away from me. "Documents are signed and legally binding," I announced, transmitting the files back to the war room. "Received and authenticated," Mitchell said, packing the heavy printed copies into a reinforced leather briefcase. "My team is mobilizing to the lobby now. The motorcade is on standby downstairs." I closed the communication terminal, the screens fading to black. I stood up from my desk and took a deep, steadying breath. Just 4 hours ago, I had been standing in the lobby of Apex Solutions, dressed in cheap clothes, quietly absorbing Lexi's vicious public humiliation. I had allowed them to believe I was weak, pathetic, and utterly defeated. I had let them enjoy their hollow victory. Now I was walking back into that building as the absolute architect of their ruin. I grabbed my designer handbag, checked the clasp on my diamond watch, and stepped out of my home office. There would be no mercy, no hesitation, and absolutely no second chances. It was time to go hunt. I stepped out of my home office and walked down the wide, art-lined corridor of my penthouse. The sheer quiet of the space was about to be broken. Right on cue, the soft chime of my private, secure elevator echoed through the expansive living room. The heavy steel doors slid apart seamlessly, revealing my lead corporate attorney, Mitchell flanked by 3 elite junior partners from his firm. They stepped into my home, moving in perfect synchronization, dressed in immaculate dark suits, carrying reinforced leather briefcases that held the physical manifestation of my family's total ruin. "Right on time, Mitchell," I said, crossing the plush rug to meet them at the massive marble dining table that doubled as our staging area. "Traffic was remarkably cooperative, Naomi," Mitchell replied, setting his heavy briefcase down on the cool stone surface. The junior partners immediately fanned out, opening their respective cases and extracting thick stacks of legal documents printed on heavy watermarked archival paper. Digital signatures were legally binding, but executing a hostile takeover of this magnitude required the undeniable physical weight of hard copies to drop onto the boardroom table. Mitchell unclasped his primary folio and pulled out 2 distinct red-tabbed folders. He slid them across the marble directly toward me. "I want to review the exact phrasing of the termination clauses one last time," I demanded, tapping my manicured fingernail against the top folder which bore my father's name. Harrison has spent the last decade bragging about his ironclad executive severance package. He routinely told the board that his golden parachute was so massive firing him would bankrupt the company anyway. I need your absolute, unequivocal guarantee that he walks out of that building today with absolutely nothing. Mitchell's expression was a mask of cold, predatory confidence. He leaned forward, pointing to the heavily highlighted paragraph on the second page of my father's termination notice. "You have my absolute guarantee, Naomi," Mitchell stated, his voice ringing with absolute certainty. Standard executive contracts protect against termination without cause, which usually triggers those massive severance payouts and accelerated pension vestings. But your father and brother are not being let go due to corporate restructuring or poor performance. They are being summarily terminated for cause, specifically citing gross financial misconduct, criminal embezzlement, and breach of fiduciary duty. I picked up the document, my eyes scanning the flawless legal terminology. Mitchell and his team had constructed a masterpiece of corporate execution. By formally invoking the for cause provision based on irrefutable evidence of federal tax fraud, Mitchell continued, his tone clinical and sharp, "We instantly nullify every single protective clause in their contracts. The golden parachutes are legally shredded. Their deferred compensation plans are entirely voided. The luxury health insurance policies are canceled effective at 2 o'clock today. Cameron's corporate expense accounts, the ones he has been using to fund his offshore shell companies, will be frozen the very second you hand him this paper. They will not receive a single cent of severance pay. We are even seizing their unvested stock options to cover a fraction of the damages they inflicted on the company." A profound sense of satisfaction washed over me. For my entire life, my family had wielded their wealth like a weapon, using it to control, belittle, and isolate me. They believed money made them invincible. Now I was legally stripping away every ounce of their financial armor. Cameron would have to figure out how to pay the leases on his stolen sports cars without a company credit card. Harrison would have to face his wealthy country club friends completely bankrupt and publicly disgraced. They were about to experience the exact same terrifying financial instability they had maliciously subjected me to when they kicked me out of the family years ago. "And Lexi?" I asked, shifting my gaze to the junior partner handling the human resources restructuring. "My sister-in-law was incredibly eager to humiliate me this morning. I want to make sure her exit is equally thorough." The junior partner, a sharp-eyed woman holding a blue folder, nodded briskly. "Lexi's termination is standard protocol. Since she is not an executive officer, her dismissal does not require a board vote. However, because her department completely failed to detect or report Cameron's massive embezzlement scheme, she is being terminated for gross negligence. Her final paycheck has already been calculated and will be mailed to her home address. She will be escorted off the premises alongside her husband." "Perfect," I said, handing the red folders back to Mitchell. "Pack them up. It is time for the final briefing. Walk me through the exact tactical sequence for our arrival." The atmosphere in the penthouse grew intensely focused. The legal team gathered around the marble table, treating the corporate takeover with the deadly seriousness of a military strike. The tension in the room was palpable, a heavy electric charge that made the hairs on my arms stand up. The motorcade is currently idling in the secure underground loading dock of your building, Mitchell outlined, checking his own watch. We will depart in exactly 4 minutes. The drive to Apex Solutions will take roughly 12 minutes. We are scheduled to pull up to their main plaza at exactly 1:45. What about building security? I asked. Lexi ordered the guards to throw me out this morning. I do not want any physical altercations in the lobby when we return. We have already neutralized that threat, Mitchell replied smoothly. 10 minutes ago, I sent an encrypted priority directive to the head of Apex Corporate Security, bypassing the local desk guards entirely. I informed him that the new majority shareholder is arriving with private legal counsel and armed protective details. I provided your name and your new corporate credentials. The security chief knows that any interference with your entry will result in his immediate termination. The guards who escorted you out this morning will be the ones holding the doors open for you this afternoon. I smiled, imagining the sheer panic that must be quietly ripping through the security desk right now. Once we clear the lobby, we take the executive elevator directly to the top floor. Mitchell continued detailing the final steps of our assault. The board meeting is scheduled in the main glass conference room. Harrison, Cameron, and Lexi are already inside, setting up the catering and preparing to welcome their billionaire savior. We will enter the room exactly at 2 o'clock. My junior partners will immediately secure all exits and confiscate any company laptops or tablets on the table to prevent last-minute data deletion. I will stand to your right to handle any legal objections they attempt to scream out. They will scream, I confirmed, knowing my family's explosive temperaments perfectly. Harrison will likely threaten violence and Cameron will throw a tantrum. Let them. I want to look them in the eyes while their entire reality shatters. If they become physically aggressive, our private security detail will physically restrain them and hand them over to the local authorities for assault. Mitchell assured me, his eyes locking onto mine. You are fully protected, Naomi. We hold all the power. The trap is completely inescapable. I looked around the table at my elite team of lawyers. We had meticulously planned this execution for over a year. Every legal loophole had been closed. Every financial document had been weaponized. The family that had treated me like garbage was about to be utterly destroyed by their own incompetence and greed. Close the briefcases, I ordered, my voice dropping to a low, lethal register. In perfect unison, the legal team snapped the heavy brass locks of their leather cases shut. The sharp, synchronized clicking sound echoed through the penthouse like the cocking of a firing squad's rifles. I adjusted the cuffs of my bespoke suit, feeling the adrenaline pumping fiercely through my veins. The predator was finally ready to strike. Let us go to work, I said, turning and leading my team toward the private elevator. The final countdown had officially begun. The descent from my penthouse to the underground loading dock was swift and entirely silent. When the private elevator doors opened, a fleet of 4 jet-black armored SUVs was idling perfectly in line on the polished concrete of the secure garage. My private security detail stood at strict attention, stepping forward to pull open the heavy rear door of the lead vehicle for me. Mitchell and the junior partners filed into the trailing vehicles with practiced military precision. I slid into the plush leather seat, feeling the immediate surge of acceleration as the motorcade swept out of the garage and merged seamlessly into the heavy afternoon city traffic. I glanced at the digital clock glowing brightly on the center console. It was 1:32 in the afternoon. We were making excellent time. The crowded streets of the financial district blurred past the tinted windows, but my focus remained absolute and unshakable. I visualized the massive layout of the Apex Solutions building, mapping out the precise path from the main entrance lobby to the glass-walled executive boardroom on the top floor. Every single step of this arrival was calculated. Every movement was deliberately designed to project absolute, undeniable dominance. We are exactly 3 blocks away. Naomi? Mitchell's voice crackled crisply through the secure intercom connecting our vehicles. The building security chief just confirmed receipt of our arrival protocol. The perimeter is clear and the front desk has been instructed to stand down. Understood, I replied, my voice steady and freezing cold. Maintain the tight formation when we exit the vehicles. Nobody speaks to the press if they happen to catch wind of this, and nobody engages with lower-level management in the lobby. We walk a straight, unbroken line directly to the executive elevator. At exactly 1:45, the motorcade turns sharply onto the sweeping circular drive that framed the main plaza of Apex Solutions. Just hours earlier, I had walked up this very same pavement, wearing a cheap, unbranded blouse, bracing myself for a day of menial data entry and expected family abuse. I had arrived as a supposed charity case, a financial failure seeking a pathetic handout from my generous father. Now I was arriving as the absolute owner of the very concrete beneath the tires. The vehicles came to a synchronized halt directly in front of the towering glass entrance. My security lead stepped out first, swiftly opening my door and standing guard. I placed my designer heel onto the pavement, stepping out into the crisp afternoon air. The bespoke midnight blue suit hugged my frame perfectly, transforming me from the victim they remembered into a ruthless corporate executioner. Mitchell and his legal team fell in seamlessly behind me, their heavy leather briefcases gripping the financial death warrants for my father and brother. I did not pause to take in the scenery. I walked purposefully toward the massive revolving doors, my security detail flanking me on both sides to ensure an unobstructed path. As we stepped through the glass and into the grand marble lobby, the shift in the atmosphere was instantaneous and electric. The bustling noise of the midday corporate crowd abruptly died down. Employees holding coffees and chatting near the reception desk literally froze in their tracks. Heads turned, eyes widened, and the frantic whispering began almost immediately. They recognized me, of course. Many of them had witnessed Lexi screaming at me in this exact spot at 8:45 this morning. They had seen the arrogant human resources director publicly humiliate me, mock my clothing, and demand my immediate removal from the premises. But the woman walking toward them now bore absolutely no resemblance to the quiet, compliant girl who had surrendered her temporary visitor badge. I was radiating an aura of sheer, unadulterated power, backed by a wall of intimidating corporate lawyers and hired muscle. I kept my gaze fixed straight ahead, walking with a measured, predatory grace. The crowd physically parted for us employees, stepping backward defensively as my entourage cut straight through the center of the atrium. I felt the heavy weight of their stares, the palpable confusion and shock radiating from every corner of the room. They were desperately trying to reconcile the disgraced sister they had heard toxic rumors about with the titan currently commanding their lobby. Directly ahead, the main security checkpoint stood between the atrium and the elevator banks. Behind the marble desk stood the exact same two large security guards Lexi had commanded to throw me out just hours prior. I watched their expressions transform from routine boredom to sheer absolute panic as they saw me leading a literal corporate army directly toward their station. The taller guard physically recoiled, his hand instinctively dropping toward his radio, clearly unsure if he was supposed to stop me or run away. He looked terrified, sweat breaking out on his forehead as he recognized the woman he had nearly put his hands on that morning. He opened his mouth, likely to ask for my identification or demand a reason for my return, but he never got the chance to utter a single word. I did not slow my pace. I simply locked eyes with him, delivering a glare so freezing and authoritative that it pinned his feet firmly to the floor. Mitchell stepped smoothly slightly ahead of me, flashing a titanium black credential card that clearly bore the insignia of the new controlling equity firm. The security chief had obviously delivered the warning exactly as instructed, because the moment the guard saw that card, his posture completely collapsed. He did not ask for my name. He did not ask for my appointment details. He simply swallowed hard, took a massive step backward, and frantically slapped the override button on his console. The heavy glass security turnstiles snapped open simultaneously, granting us completely unrestricted access to the inner sanctum of the building. The second guard lowered his head, refusing to even meet my gaze as I glided past him. The ultimate irony hung thick in the air. The very men tasked with keeping me out were now forced to hold the gates wide open for my hostile takeover. "Flawless entry," Mitchell murmured quietly as we moved past the checkpoint and approached the exclusive executive elevator bank. "They look like they just saw a ghost." "They are seeing their new reality," I corrected smoothly, pressing the call button for the top floor. The brushed steel doors of the executive elevator slid open instantly, waiting to carry me up to the final confrontation. I stepped inside, turning around to face the lobby one last time as my legal team filed in around me. The entire ground floor was still watching us in stunned silence. I kept my face entirely devoid of emotion as the doors slowly glided shut, sealing me inside the ascending metal box. The digital display above the door began ticking upward, counting the floors. Floor 10, Floor 15, Floor 20. Each passing number felt like a heavy drumbeat leading to a long overdue execution. Harrison, Cameron, and Lexi were waiting at the top, currently swimming in their own arrogance and popping champagne for a billionaire investor they thought would save them. They were happily celebrating the very deal that was about to strip them of everything they owned. The elevator surged upward smoothly, carrying the legal guillotine directly to their doorstep. I adjusted the lapel of my jacket, feeling completely invincible. The waiting was over. Stepping out of the elevator. On the 50th floor, my custom heels sank silently into the plush monogrammed carpet of the executive corridor. The entire floor was eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the frantic energy in the lobby below. My security detail fanned out instinctively, securing the perimeter of the hallway, while Mitchell and his junior partners matched my deliberate pace. At the far end of the corridor stood the main executive boardroom. Its walls were constructed of heavy, soundproof glass designed to project an image of corporate transparency while keeping the actual conversations strictly confidential. But someone had carelessly left one of the heavy mahogany doors cracked open by an inch. The sound of clinking crystal and boisterous laughter spilled out into the quiet hallway. I held up a hand, silently signaling my team to halt just a few feet away from the entrance. I wanted to observe them in their natural habitat one last time. I wanted to witness the absolute peak of their arrogant delusion before I burned it all to the ground. Through the narrow gap, the scene was playing out exactly as I had anticipated. The massive oak conference table had been pushed aside to make room for a lavish catered spread. Silver platters piled high with fresh lobster, oysters, and caviar sat completely untouched. Harrison was standing at the head of the room, his suit jacket unbuttoned, looking more relaxed than he had in years. He held a bottle of Dom Perignon in one hand and a crystal flute in the other, expertly pouring the expensive champagne while beaming at his golden child. Cameron sat slouched in a leather executive chair with his feet arrogantly propped up on the polished wood table. He held his glass out, accepting the pour with a smug, self-satisfied grin. Catherine stood beside him, resting an affectionate hand on his shoulder, completely oblivious to the fact that her precious son had stolen $14 million from their legacy. Lexi was perched on the edge of the table, tossing her hair and laughing loudly at something Harrison had just said. They were celebrating. They were actively toasting to their own brilliance, firmly believing that they had outsmarted the global financial system. "To Cameron," Harrison announced, raising his glass high. His booming voice echoed clearly through the cracked door. "For keeping this ship afloat through the storm. Those aggressive creditors thought they could squeeze us, but you navigated the turbulent waters perfectly. And to our new billionaire partner, whoever he is, for recognizing the absolute value of the Apex legacy. He is bringing the capital, but we are keeping the control." "Hear, hear!" Cameron cheered, clinking his glass against his father's. "I told you not to worry, Dad. The creative accounting gave us the exact runway we needed. Once this private equity firm drops the cash injection into our operating accounts, I will smooth over the vendor ledgers, and no one will be the wiser. We played the board perfectly." I listened to my brother openly admit to cooking the books, completely unbothered by the federal crimes he had committed. He genuinely believed his massive theft was a brilliant corporate maneuver. Lexi took a delicate sip of her champagne and smiled viciously. "Well, today is definitely a massive victory for the family. We secured our funding, we secured our future, and I personally secured the lobby this morning. I must admit, handling your sister was the absolute highlight of my week, Cameron." Catherine let out a dismissive, elegant little sigh. "Oh, please tell me Naomi did not make a hysterical scene. I told Harrison it was a terrible idea to offer her that data entry job. She has always been so volatile and deeply ungrateful. I just knew she would try to cause a problem on a day as important as this. She did not even have the chance to cause a problem. Lexi bragged, her voice dripping with cruel satisfaction. I intercepted her right in the middle of the atrium, before she could even get to the security desk. I fired her on the spot. You should have seen her face, Catherine. She looked completely pathetic. I told her she was a charity case and ordered security to throw her out. She just handed over her badge and scurried away like a frightened little mouse. Harrison threw his head back and laughed, a deep, booming sound that used to make me shrink with anxiety when I was a teenager. Good for you, Lexi. Honestly, Naomi needed a harsh reality check. She has spent the last decade playing pretend in the city, acting like her ridiculous startup investments meant something. She needed to hit rock bottom to finally learn her station in life. I only offered her that minimum wage job to break her pride. Exactly, Cameron chimed in, swirling the champagne in his glass. She actually thinks she understands business. Do you remember that pathetic digital strategy binder she tried to hand you years ago, Dad? She actually thought she could tell us how to run a logistics empire. Firing her in front of the entire staff was the best thing for her. Maybe now she will realize she is completely incompetent and stop trying to play in our league. She needs to understand that the adults are talking today. She is just bitter because she will never have what we have, Catherine added soothingly, smoothing the lapel of Cameron's suit. She refuses to be compliant, so she will always be a failure. We tried to include her, but some people simply cannot be helped. Now let us focus on what actually matters. What time is this investor supposed to arrive? Harrison checked the heavy gold Rolex on his wrist. The private equity representatives are scheduled to walk through those doors at exactly 2 o'clock. We have 10 minutes. Everyone look sharp. We need to project absolute dominance. We are going to let them inject their billions, and then we are going to dictate exactly how this company runs moving forward. I stood perfectly still in the quiet corridor, my security team waiting silently behind me. I listened to them congratulate themselves on my humiliation. I listened to them justify their cruelty, their corruption, and their sheer unadulterated arrogance. They were so thoroughly drunk on their own delusions of grandeur that they could not even fathom the reality of their situation. They thought I was a frightened little mouse who had scurried away in defeat. They thought they had broken my pride and secured their empire in one single masterful stroke. They had absolutely no idea that the executioner was already standing at their door. I turned my head slightly, catching Mitchell's eye. His face was a mask of cold professional anticipation. He gave me a single sharp nod. The documents were ready. The legal trap was locked. The emotional detachment I felt was absolute and freezing. I did not feel a single ounce of familial obligation toward the people in that room. They were not my family. They were merely corrupt executives trespassing in my building, consuming my catered food, and drinking my expensive champagne. I reached out, wrapping my fingers around the cool brass handle of the heavy mahogany door. I did not knock. I did not hesitate. I pushed the door open wide, stepping out of the shadows and directly into the blinding light of their ignorant celebration. The heavy mahogany doors swung inward with a smooth, silent glide, completely shattering the barrier between their fabricated reality and my absolute truth. As I crossed the threshold, the physical shift in the room's atmosphere was instantaneous and electric. The clinking of crystal champagne flutes ceased entirely. The boisterous, self-congratulatory laughter died in their throats, replaced by a suffocating, heavy silence. My security operatives moved with immediate lethal efficiency, stepping inside and taking up positions flanking the double doors. They crossed their arms and stood with their feet firmly planted, sealing the only exit. Mitchell and the 3 junior partners fanned out behind me, their presence a dark, intimidating wall of bespoke suits and reinforced leather briefcases. I walked directly toward the head of the massive oak conference table. I did not rush. I let the sharp click of my designer heels echo against the polished hardwood floor, measuring the exact distance between my past victimization and my current absolute dominance. Harrison was the first to process the visual anomaly. He lowered his bottle of Dom Perignon, his eyes darting frantically from the imposing security guards blocking the door to the elite legal team standing at my back. his brain deeply clouded by his own arrogance, and the midday alcohol clearly struggled to reconcile the image of the daughter he had deemed a worthless failure with the terrifying corporate phalanx currently invading his sanctuary. Naomi! Harrison bellowed, his face instantly flushing a deep, angry crimson. The shock quickly morphed into the familiar tyrannical rage he had always used to control me. What is the meaning of this? How dare you interrupt this meeting? How on earth did you even get past the front desk? Catherine gasped, pressing a hand against her pearl necklace, her eyes wide with manufactured horror. Naomi, this is highly inappropriate. You are completely out of line. We are expecting extremely important people in a matter of minutes. You cannot just storm in here throwing another one of your hysterical tantrums. Cameron slammed his champagne flute down onto the table, spilling the expensive liquid across the polished wood. He stood up, puffing out his chest, attempting to project the authority of a chief operating officer defending his territory. Are you completely insane, Dad? Call the lobby right now. The guards downstairs are going to be fired for letting her back up here. Naomi, turn around and walk out right now before we have you arrested for trespassing. I stopped exactly 3 feet away from the head of the table. I did not say a single word. I simply looked at them. The sheer panic vibrating beneath their loud, aggressive demands was palpable. They were terrified that my presence would somehow ruin their impending billion-dollar bailout. They thought I was an embarrassing glitch in their perfect day, a desperate woman seeking attention before the real investors arrived to hand them a blank check. Lexi, fueled by the same unearned confidence she had displayed in the lobby that morning, decided to take matters into her own hands. She pushed off the edge of the conference table, her face twisting into a mask of pure vicious condescension. I literally fired you at 8:45 this morning, Lexi snarled, marching directly toward me with her chin raised high. I told you that you were a pathetic charity case. I specifically ordered you to leave the premises. You are not an employee here. You are not a welcome guest. You are nothing but an unstable embarrassment to this family. You think bringing a few rented bodyguards is going to scare us? You are going to ruin the most critical financial transaction in this company's history. Nobody is ruining anything, Lexi, I replied, my voice completely devoid of the emotional hysteria she was expecting. The transaction is already complete. Shut your mouth, Harrison roared, slamming his fist against the table. He reached for the platinum intercom console embedded in the wood, jabbing the security button repeatedly. Security. Security, get a response team to the executive boardroom immediately. We have an intruder. I want her and these thugs removed by force. The intercom speaker emitted nothing but dead, hollow static. Harrison jabbed the button again, the vein in his neck bulging dangerously as his face turned an alarming shade of purple. The security chief is not going to answer you, Harrison, Mitchell stated smoothly, stepping slightly forward to stand at my right shoulder. He has received strict encrypted directives from his new employer. He knows exactly who is in this room, and he knows better than to intervene. Harrison's eyes locked onto Mitchell. He finally registered the unmistakable posture and sharp tailoring of a high-powered corporate attorney. The confusion in my father's eyes deepened into a frantic, unhinged frenzy. Who the hell are you? I demand to know who you people are and what you are doing in my building. Lexi did not wait for Mitchell to answer. Her patience completely evaporated. Furious that her morning victory was being openly challenged and that her father-in-law's commands were being ignored, she lunged forward. She raised her hand to physically grab my shoulder fully, intending to shove me toward the door and reassert her dominance through physical force, exactly as my family had always done when words failed them. She never made contact. Mitchell moved with blinding, terrifying speed. He stepped directly between us, raising a single rigid arm that stopped Lexi dead in her tracks. He did not touch her, but the sheer lethal intensity of his physical intervention forced her to stumble backward, her eyes widening in sudden, genuine fear. Lay a hand on the majority shareholder, Mitchell stated, his voice a freezing, razor-sharp blade that sliced through the heated air of the boardroom, and you will be in federal custody before sunset. The words hit the room like a seismic shockwave. Lexi froze entirely, her arms suspended in midair, her mouth hanging open as her brain desperately tried to process the impossible sentence. Cameron stopped reaching for his cell phone. Catherine let out a strangled, breathless gasp, gripping the edge of her chair for support. Harrison stood completely paralyzed, his finger still pressing uselessly against the dead intercom button. The absolute silence that followed was suffocating. The air in the room grew instantly heavy, thick with the crushing weight of their dawning realization. I maintained my icy composure, watching the exact moment their entire fabricated reality began to splinter. I slowly reached out and placed my hand on the back of Harrison's expensive leather executive chair, the seat of power he had occupied for decades. The throne from which he had continuously belittled me, undervalued me, and ultimately banished me. Majority shareholder. Harrison repeated, his voice dropping to a hoarse, ragged whisper. The arrogance had entirely drained from his face, leaving behind the terrified expression of a man who suddenly realized he was standing on a trapdoor. He looked from Mitchell to the junior partners, and finally slowly his eyes locked onto mine. What is he talking about, Naomi? I smiled. It was not a smile of joy, nor was it a smile of forgiveness. It was the smile of an apex predator that had finally cornered its prey. He is telling you to step away from my chair, Harrison, I said softly, my voice echoing with undeniable absolute authority. The adults are talking now. Harrison stared at me, his eyes wide and completely uncomprehending. He looked at the leather executive chair, then back at me, his brain completely short-circuiting as the gravity of my statement crashed into him. He did not move voluntarily. He simply stumbled backward, his legs giving out slightly until his broad shoulders hit the heavy glass wall of the boardroom. The sudden absence of his towering tyrannical presence at the head of the table left a massive shifting void in the room. I did not hesitate for a single second to fill it. I stepped forward, my designer heels clicking decisively against the floor, and positioned myself directly behind the chair. I ran my hand along the smooth leather backrest. This was the exact spot where Harrison had sat for over a decade, dismantling my self-esteem, aggressively rejecting my business proposals, and declaring my brother the undisputed genius of the family. I pulled the chair out and sat down smoothly, crossing my legs and folding my hands on the pristine mahogany surface. Mitchell moved flawlessly to my right side. He unclasped the brass locks of his heavy leather briefcase. The sharp metallic snaps echoed like gunshots in the dead silent room. He extracted the thick, red-tabbed folio containing the finalized acquisition records, the state filings, and the executed debt-to-equity conversions. He handed the thick stack of premium watermarked paper directly to me. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to shout or scream to command the room. True power does not beg for attention. It simply exists. I lifted the heavy stack of documents and dropped them squarely onto the center of the polished wooden table. The heavy thud made Catherine physically flinch. You have been eagerly awaiting the arrival of a major private equity conglomerate, I stated, my voice echoing evenly off the glass walls. You have spent the past month begging their representatives for a massive capital injection. You handed over your financial records, exposed your deepest vulnerabilities, and prayed that a billionaire savior would bail you out of the $60 million in defaulted loans currently suffocating this company. You toasted to your own brilliance just moments ago, absolutely convinced that you had secured your legacy. You have been eagerly awaiting the arrival of a major private equity conglomerate, I stated, my voice echoing evenly off the glass walls. You have spent the past month begging their representatives for a massive capital injection. You handed over your financial records, exposed your deepest vulnerabilities, and prayed that a billionaire savior would bail you out of the $60 million in defaulted loans currently suffocating this company. You toasted to your own brilliance just moments ago, absolutely convinced that you had secured your legacy. You have been eagerly awaiting the arrival of a major private equity conglomerate, I stated, my voice echoing evenly off the glass walls. You have spent the past month begging their representatives for a massive capital injection. You handed over your financial records, exposed your deepest vulnerabilities, and prayed that a billionaire savior would bail you out of the $60 million in defaulted loans currently suffocating this company. You toasted to your own brilliance just moments ago, absolutely convinced that you had secured your legacy. I am the billionaire savior Harrison, My private equity firm Vanguard Holdings purchased every single piece of your toxic debt over the last 12 months for pennies on the dollar. And as of 2 o'clock today, we legally executed a hostile debt-to-equity swap. I did not come here to fund your corruption. I came here to collect. Cameron let out a harsh, frantic laugh, shaking his head violently as he pushed himself off the edge of the table. That is an absolute lie. You are completely bluffing. Vanguard Holdings is a massive international fund. You do not have that kind of capital. You were begging for a data entry job this morning. You are just trying to pull some insane psychological stunt to get back at us. Cameron did not wait for an invitation. He lunged forward and snatched the thick stack of documents from the center of the table. His hands were moving frantically as he flipped open the heavy cardstock cover. He wanted desperately to find a flaw, a typo, a fake letterhead, that would prove I was just a hysterical, bitter sister playing a cruel prank. I watched him with clinical detachment as his eyes darted across the dense legal text. I watched his gaze track over the formal declarations from the state of Delaware. I watched him find the capitalization table, the exact same pie chart Mitchell had shown me hours earlier, displaying the massive 80.4% voting stake, now permanently controlled by my firm. But the true world-shattering realization did not hit him until he reached the final page. There, printed in bold, undeniable black ink, was the formal corporate registry for Vanguard Holdings. The blood drained from Cameron's face so rapidly that his skin took on a sickly, translucent pallor. His jaw went completely slack. His hands began to shake violently, the thick pages rattling loudly in the quiet boardroom. He stopped breathing. He was staring directly at the signature line. He was staring at my name, legally registered and verified as the founder and chief executive officer of the acquiring firm. The reality hit him like a runaway freight train. No! Cameron choked out, his voice barely a wheeze. The arrogant, untouchable golden boy completely evaporated, leaving behind a terrified, cornered thief. He dropped the documents onto the table as if they were physically burning his hands. He stumbled backward, knocking his own chair over with a loud crash. This is impossible. This cannot be real. Harrison lunged forward, roughly shoving Cameron aside to snatch the documents from the table. What does it say, Cameron? What on earth does it say? Harrison's eyes scanned the exact same pages. I watched my father, the man who had repeatedly told me I lacked the intellect for business, who had mocked my startups and exiled me from his empire, read the undeniable proof of my absolute supremacy. The muscles in his jaw twitched erratically. His hands gripped the papers so tightly his knuckles turned completely white. He stared at my signature, the legal stamp of the state, and the 80% ownership transfer. Catherine rushed to his side, gripping his arm tightly. Harrison, what is it? Tell me she is lying. Tell me this is just another one of her pathetic cries for attention. Harrison did not answer her. He could not form the words. He slowly lowered the documents, staring at me with a mixture of absolute terror and profound, devastating shock. The company he had built, the legacy he had sacrificed his own daughter to protect, was entirely gone. It had been legally swallowed whole, and the predator sitting at the head of his table was the very woman he had called a family failure just hours ago. The charity case owns you, I said softly, the silence in the room amplifying every single syllable. Every desk, every computer, every patent, and every single dollar flowing through the accounts of this building now belongs exclusively to me. You do not have a silent partner. You do not have a bailout. You have an eviction notice. Lexi stood completely frozen near the catering spread, her earlier viciousness entirely extinguished. She looked at the documents, then at my customized designer suit, and finally at the imposing wall of elite corporate lawyers standing behind me. Her hands began to tremble as the reality of what she had done at 8:45 that morning finally registered in her brain. She had publicly humiliated, mocked, and enthusiastically fired the new owner of the entire corporation. You have lost your company, Harrison. I continued, leaning forward and resting my hands on the table. Your equity is completely diluted. You hold zero voting power. You cannot block this, you cannot appeal this, and you cannot undo this. I bought your empire, and now I am going to clean house. Mitchell stepped forward, placing 3 sleek black folders onto the mahogany table. I placed my hand flat on the top folder, sliding it deliberately across the polished wood until it hit my father's fingertips. Open it, Harrison, I commanded. He hesitated, his hands still trembling from the shock of the ownership documents. He flipped the cover open. Inside was the comprehensive forensic audit my team had completed, highlighting every single fraudulent transaction he had authorized over the past 4 years. As the new majority shareholder of Apex Solutions, I stated, my voice echoing with icy precision, I am exercising my right to immediately restructure the executive board. Harrison, you are officially terminated as Chief Executive Officer effective this exact second. You are not being let go due to corporate downsizing. You are being fired for cause, specifically gross financial misconduct and federal tax fraud. Harrison's face turned an ashen shade of gray. You cannot do this. My contract guarantees a severance package. I have a golden parachute. You owe me $20 million if you force me out. I owe you absolutely nothing, I shot back, leaning forward. Your executive contract specifically voids any and all severance payouts in the event of criminal misconduct. You deliberately signed off on massively inflated operational losses. You intentionally committed federal tax fraud to hide the fact that your son was stealing from this company. You legally certified fraudulent documents to keep him out of prison. By invoking the for-cause provision, your golden parachute is shredded. Your deferred compensation is voided. You are walking out of this building with nothing but the clothes on your back. Catherine let out a sharp cry, grabbing Harrison's arm. Harrison, tell her she is wrong. Tell her you did not do this. But Harrison could not speak. He stared at the audit report, recognizing his own forged signatures and the heavily redacted tax filings that my team had successfully recovered. The invincible titan of industry was completely broken, reduced to a terrified old man facing federal ruin. I shifted my gaze to my brother. Cameron was gripping the edge of the conference table, his knuckles bone white, his eyes darting frantically toward the exit. He looked like a cornered animal, realizing the trap had just snapped shut. I slid the second black folder across the table. It stopped perfectly in front of him. Cameron, I said, my voice dropping to a lethal quiet register. You are officially terminated from your position as Chief Operating Officer. Your termination is also for cause. You are being fired for corporate embezzlement, wire fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. It was a mistake, Cameron stammered, his voice cracking entirely. I can fix it. I just needed a temporary loan to cover some bad investments. I was going to pay the company back, Naomi, I swear. You created a network of shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands. I recited, delivering the facts with merciless clarity. You funneled $14 million through phantom logistics vendors. You paid for freight shipments that never existed. You used stolen corporate capital to buy 2 custom sports cars in cash. You leased a luxury yacht in the Maldives. You even bought a $3 million vacation home in Aspen under your wife's maiden name. Lexi gasped loudly, her hand flying to her mouth. She had been perfectly happy to spend the stolen money, but hearing the crimes listed aloud in front of a team of elite corporate lawyers shattered her arrogant delusion. My legal team has already forwarded this entire forensic audit file, including your offshore routing numbers, directly to the Internal Revenue Service and the federal prosecutor, I told him, watching the last remaining drop of hope drain from his face. Your company credit cards are frozen. Your unvested stock options are seized to cover a fraction of the damages you inflicted on this firm. You have absolutely no corporate protection left. Cameron collapsed back into his chair, burying his face in his hands. He let out a pathetic, guttural sob. The golden child, the supposed genius, who had stolen my ideas and paraded them as his own, was finally exposed as nothing more than a common thief. I then turned my attention to the side of the room, locking eyes with my sister-in-law. Lexi was practically vibrating with terror. She had backed away from the catering spread, pressing herself against the glass wall as if trying to physically merge with it and disappear. And then there is you, Lexi, I said smoothly. Naomi, please, Lexi begged, holding her hands up in a desperate, placating gesture. Her voice was shrill, completely stripped of the nasty, condescending tone she had used on me just 5 hours prior. I was just doing my job this morning. Harrison told me to be strict with you. I was only following his directives. We are family. You cannot hold that against me. I am not terminating you, Lexi, I replied, standing up straight and adjusting the cuffs of my bespoke suit. A fleeting look of profound relief washed over her face, but I extinguished it instantly. I cannot terminate you because you were already fired at 8:45 this morning, I clarified coldly. You loudly and enthusiastically declared my employment terminated in the main lobby. As the Director of Human Resources, you failed completely to detect your husband's massive embezzlement scheme. That constitutes gross negligence. Your final paycheck is being mailed to your home address. You no longer have any authorization to be on this floor. I looked at the three of them, taking in the absolute devastation I had just unleashed. They had spent my entire life trying to make me feel small, worthless, and utterly dependent. They had kicked me out, mocked my ambitions, and actively plotted to steal my remaining inheritance. Now they were sitting in the ruins of their own making. Get out of my building, I commanded, my voice echoing with finality. Mitchell, have security escort these former employees off the premises immediately. Ensure they hand over their corporate phones, their keycards, and their building access fobs before they are placed on the street. The private security operatives stepped forward instantly, their imposing frames casting dark shadows across the boardroom table. They moved with silent, uncompromising authority, reaching for the executives who had believed they were completely untouchable. The executions were officially complete. The empire was purged. As the security operatives stepped forward to fulfill my orders, the paralyzing shock holding my mother hostage finally shattered. Catherine lunged across the space between us, her manicured hands grasping desperately at the edge of the mahogany table. Tears streamed down her face, ruining her immaculate makeup. It was a theatrical performance I had seen 1,000 times before. She always deployed it when she was losing control and needed to immediately flip the narrative to make herself the ultimate victim. Naomi, please stop this right now. Catherine sobbed, her voice echoing shrilly against the heavy glass walls. You cannot do this to us. You cannot throw your father and brother onto the street like criminals. We are your family. We are your own flesh and blood. You cannot do this to your own blood. She reached her trembling hand out toward me, deploying the ultimate gaslighting weapon she had utilized to keep me compliant for 33 years. She genuinely expected me to fold. She expected the suffocating weight of familial obligation to crush my newfound resolve. I did not flinch. I did not move a single inch. I looked at the woman who had spent my entire existence enabling my abuse, turning a blind eye to my father's tyranny, and actively participating in my systematic destruction. You lost the right to use that word a very long time ago, I replied, my voice slicing through her manufactured sobs with freezing surgical precision. Family does not humiliate their daughter in crowded corporate lobbies to make themselves feel powerful. Family does not intentionally embezzle $14 million and expect their outcast child to take the fall. Family does not secretly pay boyfriends to spy on their own flesh and blood. Catherine gasped, her hand flying to her chest. She realized instantly that Todd had been completely exposed, that every single toxic strategy they had deployed against me was now fully out in the open and entirely neutralized. You wanted me to be the sacrificial lamb for your monumental financial incompetence. I continued leaning forward so she could see the absolute zero in my eyes. You wanted me to sit at a data entry desk and take the federal indictment when the auditors arrived. Also, Cameron could keep his sports cars, and you could keep your country club memberships. That is not love, Catherine. That is a calculated parasitic transaction. She opened her mouth to desperately deploy another tearful excuse, but I cut her off entirely before she could form a single syllable. Do not dare cry to me about loyalty. I commanded, my tone leaving absolutely no room for debate. You made your choices. You chose to protect a thief. You chose to enable a fraud. You chose to treat me like a disposable asset. Well, the asset just liquidated you. This is not a family dinner, Catherine. This is a corporate restructuring, and your department has been completely eliminated. The finality of my words struck the room with the force of a physical blow. The absolute silence lasted only a fraction of a second before the fragile facade of their familial loyalty completely disintegrated. Deprived of their stolen wealth and facing imminent federal prosecution, the Vipers immediately turned their fangs on each other. Harrison spun around his face, purple with rage, and grabbed Cameron by the lapels of his expensive tailored suit. He shoved his golden child violently against the edge of the polished mahogany conference table. You incompetent, arrogant fool! Harrison roared, spittle flying from his lips as he shook his son. I risked my entire legacy to cover up your pathetic amateur mistakes. You looked me in the eye and told me the offshore accounts were untraceable. You guaranteed me the auditors would never find the Cayman routing numbers. You ruined me. You destroyed my life's work to buy sports cars and luxury vacations. Cameron shoved his father back hard, his own terror morphing into vicious, desperate defensiveness. Your company was already a sinking ship, old man. I just took what I was rightfully owed before the entire thing went under. You signed those tax returns. You authorized the cover-up because you were too blind and arrogant to admit your logistics model was completely obsolete. Do not try to pin all of this on me when you were the one driving us into bankruptcy. I am going to a federal prison because of your endless greed, Harrison bellowed, raising his hand as if to strike his son right there in the boardroom. Before Harrison could land the blow, Lexi inserted herself into the chaos, but she was not acting as a peacemaker. Her eyes were wild, darting frantically between the audit documents on the table and her husband. The realization that she was legally tethered to a disgraced penniless felon had completely shattered her smug composure. You told me the money was from executive performance bonuses, Lexi screamed at Cameron, her voice cracking with sheer panic and outrage. You promised me the Aspen house was totally secure. You absolute idiot. My name is on that deed. If the federal government seizes that property to pay back the creditors, my credit is completely ruined. I am not going down for your embezzlement, Cameron. I am calling a top divorce lawyer the second I walk out of this building. I am not spending the best years of my life visiting a bankrupt criminal in a federal penitentiary. Cameron stared at his wife, utterly betrayed by the blistering speed of her defection. The pristine, untouchable family empire was actively tearing itself to pieces right in front of me, fighting bitterly over the scraps of a fortune they no longer possessed. When the brutal reality set in that screaming at each other would not reverse the asset freeze or undo the corporate takeover, their survival instincts kicked in. They pivoted simultaneously, turning back to me with sickening desperation. The arrogance was completely eradicated, replaced by a pathetic, groveling submission. Harrison stepped forward, holding his hands up in a gesture of total surrender, his pride entirely broken. Naomi, please. You have made your point. You won the game. You outsmarted all of us. But you cannot run this massive logistics empire alone. You need experienced executives who understand the daily operations and the client relationships. I will step down as chief executive officer. I will take a massive pay cut. Just let me stay on as a senior advisor. I can work under your leadership. Cameron aggressively pushed his way forward, shoving his father aside to get closer to me. Naomi, I know the vendor contracts inside and out. I can undo the shell companies. I can help you clean up the ledgers so the feds do not have to get involved. Just keep me on the payroll. Give me a lower-level management position. I will report directly to you. Just do not hand those forensic audit files over to the prosecutor. Please, I am your brother. I have a wife who is about to leave me and take everything. I will do whatever you want. Even Catherine, who had spent decades treating me like an embarrassing stain on her perfect social record, clasped her hands together in a prayer-like gesture. We will do anything you ask, Naomi. We will follow your lead. You are the head of the family now. Just give us a second chance to prove we can be loyal to you. I looked at the four of them, observing their complete and utter lack of dignity. They were not apologizing for the emotional abuse they inflicted upon me for 33 years. They were not expressing genuine remorse for the millions they stole or the federal laws they broke. They were simply begging for their paychecks. They were offering to submit to my authority only because I was holding the financial blade directly to their throats. You severely overestimate your value to me, I stated, my voice echoing with absolute freezing finality. Harrison, your outdated leadership drove this company into the ground. Cameron, your only demonstrated skill is routing stolen capital to offshore accounts. Catherine, your loyalty is entirely dependent on whoever is holding the checkbook. None of you possess a single quality that I require in my corporate empire. I picked up the signed termination documents and handed them to Mitchell. There are no second chances, I commanded, my gaze locking onto my father. There are no advisory roles. There are no subordinate positions. You exhausted my mercy years ago when you threw me out of my childhood home. I am not running a family charity. I raised my hand and signaled to the elite security operatives standing by the heavy mahogany doors. They moved forward instantly, their massive frames casting dark, imposing shadows over the cowering executives. Confiscate their corporate phones, their building access cards, and their company laptops. I instructed the guards. Then physically escort them out of the building. Use the main elevators and take them directly through the center of the ground floor lobby. I want every single employee in this building to clearly see exactly what happens to thieves and frauds. The security team gripped Harrison and Cameron by their arms, hauling them toward the exit with uncompromising force. Lexi sobbed uncontrollably as a guard demanded her keycard, her designer bag shaking in her hands. Catherine wailed, crying out my name in a desperate final plea that fell on completely deaf ears. I stood at the head of the boardroom table alongside my legal team and watched the spectacle unfold. The heavy glass doors were pulled wide open. The security operatives marched my screaming, crying, utterly disgraced family down the executive corridor. I knew that in a few moments the elevator doors would open on the ground floor. The entire corporate staff, the very people Lexi had tried to impress by firing me that morning, would watch the former chief executive officer and his golden child be forcibly paraded out of the building by private security. The humiliation would be absolute. The karma was finally flawlessly realized. I had not just taken their company, I had entirely eradicated their legacy. 6 months have passed since the heavy glass doors of the boardroom swung shut on my former life. The dust has finally settled on the ruins of my family's fabricated empire, and the consequences of their actions have been absolutely devastating. Harrison and Cameron are currently drowning in a legal nightmare that they can never escape. Following the delivery of my forensic audit files to the federal prosecutor, they were both indicted on multiple counts of wire fraud and tax evasion. They are facing staggering federal fines that have completely wiped out their remaining personal assets. Harrison was forced to sell his sprawling estate at a massive loss just to cover his defense attorneys. He now lives in a tiny, dilapidated apartment on the outskirts of the city, utterly abandoned by his wealthy country club friends who treat his name like a contagious disease. Cameron lost everything. The moment the federal agents seized the Aspen vacation home and the sports cars, Lexi filed for a ruthless divorce. She abandoned him the second the stolen money dried up, taking whatever meager assets were not frozen by the government. Cameron is currently residing in a cheap roadside motel, awaiting his criminal trial, entirely stripped of his golden child status. And Todd, the man who thought he could sell my privacy for a corporate throne, found himself completely blacklisted from the financial sector. Without my penthouse to live in, and without the phantom vice president title he bargained for, he was forced to take a dead-end minimum wage job, answering phones at a rundown car dealership. He tried to call me a dozen times from restricted numbers, begging for forgiveness. I simply had my legal team serve him with a permanent restraining order. While their lives collapsed under the weight of their own greed, Apex Solutions experienced a massive, unprecedented resurrection. I am currently sitting at the head of the executive boardroom, looking across the polished mahogany table at the only person connected to my family who actually possessed an ounce of integrity. Elijah is sitting confidently in the chair that Cameron used to occupy, reviewing our latest financial projections. The difference in the room's energy is profound. Elijah had the intelligence and the moral clarity to file for divorce from my superficial status-obsessed sister, Brittany, shortly after the corporate takeover. Brittany had immediately demanded that Elijah support her parents financially, showing her true toxic colors. Elijah refused, packed his bags, and severed his ties with her completely. I did not hesitate to reward his loyalty and his undeniable brilliance. I officially promoted Elijah to Chief Operating Officer of Apex Solutions the very week my family was escorted out of the building. Free from Harrison's bigoted micromanagement and Cameron's constant sabotage, Elijah's logistical strategies were finally implemented without restriction. He completely overhauled the supply chain, eliminated the bloated contracts, and optimized our global routing systems. He slides the new quarterly report across the table toward me, a proud, genuine smile breaking across his face. We just closed the third quarter with a 40% increase in net operating profit, Elijah announces, tapping the crisp financial summary. The restructured debt has been entirely cleared from the balance sheet, and our new shipping contracts are yielding margins that Harrison never even dreamed of. Apex is officially the most profitable firm in the sector. I look at the flawless numbers and then look up at my brilliant brother-in-law. You earned every bit of this success, Elijah. I tell him, closing the folder with a satisfying snap. You were always the smartest man in the room. They were just too arrogant and prejudiced to see it. Now you are running the show, and I could not ask for a better partner at the helm. He nods, a look of profound mutual respect passing between us. We had both been marginalized by the same toxic family, and we had both emerged victorious by relying on our actual competence instead of empty entitlement. Later that evening, I step out of my private elevator and walk into the quiet, luxurious sanctuary of my penthouse. The space feels entirely different now. It is no longer a hiding place from my family's judgment. It is a monument to my absolute freedom. I pour myself a glass of imported wine and walk over to the massive floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the glittering city skyline. The city lights stretch out for miles, vibrant and alive, reflecting the boundless possibilities of my future. For 33 years, I allowed a group of selfish, corrupt individuals to dictate my worth. I internalized their cruel remarks, accepted their blatant favoritism, and convinced myself that surviving their abuse was the best I could hope for. They threw me to the wolves time and time again, hoping the harsh realities of the world would break my spirit and force me to come crawling back to them for validation. They made a fatal miscalculation. They failed to realize that throwing me to the wolves simply taught me how to lead the pack. I did not just survive the wilderness they abandoned me in. I conquered it. I built an empire from the ground up with my own two hands forged in the fires of their rejection. I have learned that blood does not automatically make someone family. Blood simply denotes a biological coincidence. True family is built on a foundation of mutual respect, unwavering loyalty, and genuine support. I have built my own chosen family, now surrounded by people like Elijah, and my brilliant legal team, individuals who value my intellect and stand by me in the trenches. I take a slow sip of my wine, feeling a deep, unshakable peace settle over my soul. I no longer carry the heavy, suffocating burden of trying to please people who are fundamentally broken. My empire is secure, my mind is clear, and my life is entirely my own. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic family members and rebuild your life from scratch? Share your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, don't forget to like and subscribe. Sometimes the trash takes itself out.